Good morning. My name is Orville Dineski, and I'm the proud owner of a John Deere 5410 tractor. I purchased a tractor used about 7 years ago. I'm a city farmer. I live on 15 acres and use a tractor mainly for brush hogging, box scraping, and the most important task, pulling hay rides for my kids and their friends. I noticed that on hay rides, the rear end would get excessively hot. About this time, I also noticed that it seemed that the brakes were dragging, and even on a fairly significant hill, the tractor no longer wanted to roll down it with the clutch engaged with the brakes off. I talked with my John Deere dealer about it, and their comment was, it must be wet hydraulic oil and you've got rust in the brake area causing the brake discs not to slide freely on the shafts. That sounded a little bit far-fetched, but I accepted their word for a while and continued to ignore the problem, not wanting to go in and deal with the potential rust problem. Some time passed, the problem seemed to get worse, and so I went to the trusty internet looking for feedback on John Deere brake sticking on 5000 series tractors. I found a number of hits. Most of the hits pointed to the idea that the return springs behind the brake cylinder were the potential cause, getting weak and causing the brake cylinder not to retract. The diagram in the manual looks something like this. You'll notice item number D is a piston. Item number C is 3 return springs that go behind the piston, causing the piston to be pulled back into its bore, releasing the pressure on plate E. Yesterday, I had some time on my hands, so I decided to finally tackle the problem of replacing the return springs on my tractor. I am not going to go into detail on pulling the axles because you can find that information elsewhere, and they've done a much better job than I can do. What I do want to go into is what I found inside that I think speaks to a different problem other than the return spring. The brake plunger is pressed into the housing, being held by the return springs, which are anchored to the housing by a roll pin that's pressed into the hole. When it assembled properly, there is a specification for the distance from the plate to the housing, and that distance per the manual is 0.488 to 0.503 inches. When I took my housings off, my first housing off, I found that the distance was only 0.44 inches, making me suspicious that the problem was being identified. If you look at the rest of the system, you'll find the pressure plate, the brake disc, and then a mating plate that it pushes up against. The total thickness on my tractor of those two plates is 0.44 inches. So my 0.44 measurement basically gave me zero clearance. I proceeded to pull out the piston as described in the manual. That's done by prying the piston out and pulling those split rings out of their bores. The system that you see in front of you, I've taken the return springs and the O-rings off to make it easy to assemble and disassemble for this video, and so that I could measure more cleanly. I've got the new return springs and the new O-rings coming, so I'm going to replace those anyway, just because I'm in this deep. As I pulled the system apart, what I noticed was that in this area right here, I found a significant puddle of oil that did not seem to drain as I was pulling things apart. I will try to demonstrate here while I run the video live. If you look in here, you'll notice that this gap here was full of oil. Showing you the piston off the other side, you'll notice that there is a boss right here. That boss is what mates up against the ring gear, which is your inner stop on the piston. The springs here, you see this, the split ring on them, those anchor into the casing and tend to pull the piston back in until this piece here hits the ring gear. As I pulled things apart, I ran my fingers down into the crack, feeling that oil, and to my surprise, I found some grit in that oil. Not totally surprising because it's a low spot and there appeared to be no drain to drain the oil out of there, so no place for the grit to go once it settled into that chamber. I went ahead and pulled the grit out and looked at it, and to my surprise, well, I'll show you some of it here in my second unit. Right here on the edge is grit that I found underneath the O-ring when I pulled the second unit apart. You'll notice here there's actually a spherical object. It almost looks like a small ball bearing or a small bead from potentially bead blasting that may have gone on at some point in the preparation of the casing. The rest of this material is kind of an off-white color, and the physical size of it is probably, the little bead is probably in the 32nd of an inch. The other pieces are probably closer to a 16th inch across. They're fairly hard and fairly hard to crush, so I don't have a hard time believing that a particle like that could be all it takes to keep this spring from retracting the piston into place. In looking around the other casing, I'll notice some material of a similar white texture. You see it right here around this opening. It appears to be about the same texture, about the same color, making me suspicious that that material, probably some kind of a sealant, was what has broken off, probably run through the gears and been milled down to size, so it's just right to fit into the crack there between the ring gear and the piston, causing the piston not to retract. So, had my friend over Dan. Dan's a farmer, seen a lot of this kind of stuff, and we were talking about what the problems were and what we should be doing about it. I pointed out to Dan that the clearance in there appeared to have trapped garbage, and we came up with the idea, I'm going to pull this one the rest of the way out. We came up with the idea of going in here on the low side with a grinding wheel and just grinding away the boss that stops the piston in its retracted state. You'll notice I did it between the spring keeper and the next alignment pin. Now obviously this is not going to do me any good if I install that ring in any position but the bottom. I am looking to make a trap for garbage in the bottom so that the garbage does not get in the way of the piston retracting. I took a grinder, I ground in, I actually ground to the point that I've undercut the piston bore so that there's plenty of room to trap garbage without holding the piston out. Encourage you not to grind too quickly. Don't heat it too much in case you get some warping for the excess heat. So take your time, grind away a little section there. The springs won't have any problem as far as bending things because they're just going to pull it back until the mating surface by the spring hits its stop. I'm assuming that is a full circle because they made it on a lathe, and that way they did not have to do any milling after the lathe procedure. I believe that that dirt or that grit in that low spot is the thing that was keeping my piston from retracting and therefore causing brake drag. Simple fix. I believe this problem probably exists on all John Deere tractors of a similar design. I hope this video is helpful to you. Wish you well, God bless, and have a good day.